Great. So we'll just do a quick check. Seems like we're good on sound. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
Super. So like mentioned, my name is Galen McAndrew. I'm with the Filecoin Foundation. I'm the program manager for the FIL Plus program. I'm going to talk about governance of the program as well as strategy, really focusing on kind of what are the goals of the program and then how do we make changes and what directions are we hoping to take the program in the future. So there's sort of a rough agenda of what we're going to cover in this talk. These slides I think will be available for people to go back and see, so you can grab that contact info. Some of the best ways to reach me will be Slack, email, and through our various GitHub repos. So starting very, very high level, Filecoin Plus goals, we have a couple different sort of statements that we use to conceptualize what the program really is intended to do. But the biggest one here is we want to add a layer of social trust to the Filecoin network so that we can incentivize useful storage. And there's a lot to unpack here. Another way to think about it is the goal of Filecoin Plus is to scale the utilization of the broader Filecoin network to help store humanity's information. And to do that, we want to incentivize data onboarding across different use cases where we use community-governed trust mechanisms. So the focus areas on this is really how do we as a program take data onboarding across this entire marketplace of Filecoin, where it could be lots of different types of use cases. There could be a direct client working with a direct SP. There could be an SP doing business development. There could be automated pathways. There could be data clearing houses. We want to say, what are all these different use cases that grow the broad network, and how do we come up with incentive models to support that? And then how do we use this sort of distributed, decentralized community to come up with our different trust mechanisms? So with that in mind, what is our scope? We are designing for all client actors, all of them, with any type of quality data who want to be doing distributed onboarding. So client actors could be a data owner or a preparer. This could include an SP. So an SP can play the role of a client actor. They are going to provide some amount of information. It could be a distributed third-party KYC, and know your client or know your customer, or it could be KYB, know your business. Those are different industry terms we use, but that's just one example of a type of information. And in trading that information, you're going to gain some social trust, or somehow proving long-term alignment with the network, some kind of long-term commitment. And maybe that's a financial collateral mechanism. There's been a lot of questions lately around what is quality data and how do we know? This is a really reasonable question to ask, and how do we do it at scale? So to start to unpack this, quality data by our definition is all content that meets local regulatory requirements, local being where the data owner is, where the data preparer is, where the storage provider is. That's still a big moving target for a lot of people in this ecosystem of how do we know what these regulatory requirements are going to be. That is not necessarily for us or the foundation or any single group in this ecosystem to define, but it is something that we have to be clear in stating as part of our scope. Quality data is something that the data owner themselves wants to see on this network. This can include private and encrypted data. 2 years ago, when Filecoin Plus was sort of getting started, private and encrypted data was mostly outside of scope. This is a huge market segment, and we want to understand how we can support it. This quality data could be open and retrievable. We've seen a huge surge in projects where they are taking existing data sets that are open, public, and retrievable, and different entities are preparing them, onboarding them, and distributing them. Those groups are not the data owners, but that data is still humanity's most important data, so that is within our scope to support. Or some type of onboarding that is going to demonstrate a proof of concept. We have seen this in different tooling projects where people will say, I am developing a platform, we don't yet have real data, we don't yet have real clients, But what I want to test is this onboarding tool, this data preparation tool. And in that case, like that is still growing the ecosystem, even if the specific data itself, maybe different groups would say is not quality. The way that they are building it, the way they're building a tool is adding quality to the network. And then we care about this concept of distributed onboarding. What we want here are multiple physical locations and multiple storage provider entities so they can meet the requirements of their client. Part of the value proposition of Filecoin is that you are able, as a client, to say where you want your data and to get copies of that data in different parts of the world so that you could maybe optimize for data being really close to you, or you could optimize for redundancy across different geopolitical regions, or you could optimize for separating out your data so that some of it is with very, green energy conscientious storage providers, or some of it is with other types of entities. The goal here, though, is that the Filecoin Plus program wants to help support that distributed onboarding. So we talked about this. People in this program have to trade information for power. This is sometimes a controversial opinion when you are working in some Web3 spaces. But a lot of Filecoin Plus is still predicated on designing a program that can meet both Web 2 and Web 3 markets. And we are building a marketplace. This marketplace needs some trade of information in order to function. This doesn't mean that all of the actors have to give all of their information to everyone at any particular time. But fundamentally, in order to gain power in Filecoin Plus, you have to trade something, because you have to tell the rest of the program that you are adding value to the network. And to do that, you have to tell them what value you're adding. So information could even be that you have staked an amount of collateral. That could be a sufficient amount of information to prove that you are aligned and committed. Information does not have to be the same for all these use cases. When we talk about power that you can get in this space, we think of it kind of in three different ways. Trust. If you trade a certain amount of information, you can gain trust in this program, in this ecosystem. And that trust would be, I come to you and I say, I am going to behave in a certain way. I'm going to do this kind of onboarding. And I would like you to trust that that is true. And we will give you some amount of trust in, you told us something qualitatively, let's give you a little bit of rope. Usually that rope that we give comes quantifiably in the form of data cap. So there's trust, there's data cap, and then the other one is social reputation. Because we manage these change mechanisms through community-driven models and soft consensus, joining the Filecoin Plus program as a trusted known entity, such as a notary, you will then get social reputation to then be able to say, I have a proposal for something. We'll touch more on that later. But some of the things that you trade, we talked about demographic details. Who are you? Where are you located? That sort of thing. Most of the stuff that we care about, though, is really around what are the data onboarding details? What is the type of data? How are you preparing it? How are you going to onboard it? What tools will you use? How do you plan to distribute it? And then is it retrievable or not? And at what scale? How did you package it? How can we test and sample that retrieval? The other type of information that we care about you trading is the ecosystem relationships. This is an economic system. What are your financial relationships with these different entities? Because that tells us, are we trading with something that is all still one organization, or are you just a storage provider and the client is a fully separate entity? This is just so that we know who we are operating with. So we have a couple program principles where we try and root most of our decisions. Transparency. This kind of falls right on the heels of what we were just talking about. You need to give us some kind of upfront qualitative info. What do you intend to do? Because this is a business market with these economically driven motivations, be transparent. If you are a storage provider and you are saying, this is the service that I am going to provide, this is how I have raised this money, this is how I'm attracting clients, this is how I'm going to charge them, that transparency can demystify what we are trying to do here. And that allows us to trust because we know what your motivations are. When you say, we don't have any economic investments in this, we just want to do this data onboarding, that doesn't really explain how you are engaging in this ecosystem that is a market. So then we get into trust, but then verify. If you tell us information qualitatively up front, how do we take downstream behavior to make quantitative verifications? If you claim you are going to operate in a certain region, you're going to meet a certain kind of deal distribution, you're going to onboard at a certain rate, you can tell us those things qualitatively up front, and then we can fact check them downstream based on your behavior and on-chain analysis. Now we know you said one thing, we gave you some power in the form of data cap, you behaved in a certain way. Did your behavior quantitatively match your qualitative claims? Great. You said something and did it. Then we can scale that power over time. If you show up and you give us a little bit of information and the program gives you a little bit of power, this is a way that we mitigate that risk. If you come to us as an SP or a client and you say, I'm trying to do 50 petabytes of onboarding, it's going to be really hard to qualitatively give us enough information for the community to say, okay, we trust you. Here's all of that power that you're asking for all at once. Instead, it's much easier to say, okay, we gathered some information about what you plan to do. Here's a little bit of power. Now go do some onboarding. Does your onboarding quantitatively match what you qualitatively told us? Here's more power and more and more. We can scale that power and trust by matching your behavior. And then the other main principle that we have is this bias to test and iterate. We are not going to get it right the first time. This is still a very new ecosystem with a very new marketplace. And new use cases are going to come up. And we need to be able to do proof of concepts rapidly and test and try things. These things may be in direct competition with one another, but how do we try different projects to learn from them? So, that in mind, how does the governance team set direction? Currently, the governance team is comprised of members from the Filecoin Foundation and PL. This is not an exclusive set. We are open to having other members from other organizations joining the governance team. Most of our community partners are joining the program as notaries, not necessarily the governance team. The governance team functions very differently, where we are setting high-level strategy and then implementing these changes. The notaries are operating in one segment of this ecosystem. Part of the reason the governance team is functioning this way is we receive budget from these organizations. They are funding a lot of this work. And as a result, they need to manage that budget. And so they need headcount to manage that money. I currently manage multiple developer teams with their own budgets, their own timelines, and we are funding them and responsible for them meeting their targets. So that is why kind of FF has this role. If the foundation is giving money to an outside ecosystem partner, we want to know that we're giving money to the right team, that they're meeting their deadlines, they're building the thing they want to build, and that is why I sit in this role kind of in the middle of that. Typically, the governance team has these summits kind of every quarter approximately. Sometimes we have them all together, sometimes we do them remote and virtual and invite people in, but that's a lot of where we do a lot of brainstorming and we set future roadmaps. Our primary focus areas for this past year were really around quality, transparency, and enablement. We've done a couple blog posts about this. We've kind of broadly sketched these out. We put them on some different websites, but we cared about how do we improve the quality of the program overall, as well as the data in the program. How do we improve transparency of the different actors, as well as transparency of what we're working on? And then how do we enable more data pathways and more teams? So that was really the quality phase that's been happening since Q1. We don't yet know what the next phase is going to look like. We are still in the quality phase, and we probably will be for at least the next quarter, because we have not met all of our OKRs, our objectives and key results for that phase. But we are already thinking and planning for what the next roadmap is going to be. And I think that the next phase is really going to be around automation, but I might be wrong, and the community might push us in another direction. The next phase might be summed up as enablement itself, or it might be permissionless. I think that automation can encapsulate both of those. I think that automation can allow us to test a lot of different pathways, but we'll touch on that. So, how do we make decisions? If this is the people involved, if this is the goal, there's a lot of actors here. We're trying to run this marketplace that has these competitive needs. Storage providers want it to be primarily designed for them. Clients want it to be primarily designed for them. These are in direct competition with one another. Our job is to try and say, how do we compromise and manage this? So we have these communication platforms. Please join us, join in the conversation. There's our GitHub Filecoin Plus Notary Governance repo. We have some Slack channels. We have notary governance calls every other week. We have them at 2 different time slots. They're open for community members to attend. And then we have a Medium blog. So the way that we typically make changes, anyone in the entire ecosystem can open a discussion and demonstrate, hey, I have an idea. There's a problem, there's a need, there's a new direction we want to go. On our GitHub Filecoin Plus Notary Governance repo, open a discussion. Explain that need. Let's unpack it and see what it is. If we can take it from that discussion and it gets enough traction, can we make it into an actual proposal? And from that proposal, how would we implement it? So the discussion is the first step in just saying, we have a need, how do we support such and such? The proposal is then, this is our test. Once that proposal gets approved from a soft consensus of the notaries, the governance team would primarily be responsible for doing the project management of that proposal. So one example of this would be the FIL Plus program. So that's our Enterprise Filecoin Plus program. The community expressed a need. We want to support private and encrypted data. This previously was not in scope. So we had a discussion. What are the risks? What are the short-term, long-term gains? What precedent would this set? If we just said, okay, sure, encrypted data, go for it, that probably wouldn't explain enough and put enough parameters. So we need to root these in those principles that we talked about. Transparency, trust and verify, scale the power over time, have a bias to testing. So from there, we were able to discuss as a community and get a draft of a proposal that said, here is a clearly scoped proof of concept project. This is what it would look like. This is how the actors would be set up. It would be this multi-sig. It would have this much data cap. It would run for this much time. This is how decisions would be made. It was a pretty robust, community-sourced proposal, and it was measurable. So from there, we said, great, well, what information do we need up front in order to support this? How do we then quantitatively verify that they're engaging with encrypted private data the way they said they were? And then how is this data going to support the entire network? Those are kind of the big questions we wanted to ask. How does this not just take one segment of one type of storage provider and grow just their business in sort of a vacuum? How do we get this behavior to help all of the storage providers that want to engage? And then we worked with a group of community leads. They ran it for a couple months, and then we transitioned that headcount to PL. And again, PL invested the resources, the financial budget, the headcount, the staffing to manage this program. From that allocation of resources, we can then support, implement, and test that program. So that's just one example of a change process. So future focus areas that we touched on around, again, the primary goal of the program: scale the utilization of the network and incentivize data onboarding for the broad community. Big things that we focus on right now that we want to be designing for, and we want your help. How do we have more pathways to data cap? Currently, the primary pathway is through this large data set notary. There's pros and cons to that. How do we design other permissionless or trustless mechanics that use a reputation score or use zero-knowledge proofs or use smart contracts to create these pathways for data cap? We want the community to help us propose those. We've seen some really good proposals already. We want to test them. Help us design more. Could there be a data clearinghouse where clients can drag and drop their data and it could be automatically distributed to different SPs? What would we need to prove that that is adding utility to the broad network? Could we have other people designing these smart contracts and running them? This is where we want to source that from the community. So with that in mind, please join us in these governance calls. We have some upcoming roadmaps that we'll be posting. There's our various Medium blogs where we're going to launch new content. And then coming up probably in Q4, we're going to have a notary election cycle where we open it back up to the community to say, I have a design for a notary that I would like to propose. This is how I will perform diligence. This is the type of client I will work with. This is how I will give out data cap. This is how that data cap would be utilized. So be thinking about what your team could provide in that way. I will also be around at DSPA. I'll probably be having some office hours during this event here Tuesday, today, and then I will also be at the FileCoin Dev Summit for the rest of this week. Come see us on Thursday. If you're coming to the Dev Summit, there will be FIL Plus presentations in the afternoon during the Governance in Action lead in this room. So I might as well just stay here all day for the next 3 days. Thank you all. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I don't know if we have time for questions or live questions, but again, I'll be around. Thank you.